African nations finally break the chains of neo-colonial exploitation and take control of their resources instead of funneling them to the West?
Of occupation. And France's presence in West Africa was, in the Sahel especially, was challenged. France also is the ex-colonial power, so there's strong anti-colonial feeling. Then it spread to first Central African Republic, where the Sangaris operation ended in 2016. Then after that, you had Burkina Faso with 2 coups, which led to the departure of the French forces.
Burkina Faso has taken the necessary step, banning gold exports to Western countries, and this bold move is sparking resistance across the continent. One by one, African nations are beginning to say enough to foreign powers' relentless extraction of their wealth. But here's the kicker. It's not France that's feeling the heat. Yes, you heard that right. Despite all the noise about France's neo-colonial grip, the spotlight is on other Western nations. So, who are these countries, and why are they getting the boot from African markets? Let's find out. How does a small, landlocked nation in West Africa manage to make global headlines and shake the foundations of neo-colonial control? Burkina Faso, under the unyielding leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, has done just that. By suspending the export of gold from artisanal and semi-mechanized mining operations, this resilient nation is taking a stand against the decades-long exploitation of its resources by Western powers. This isn't just about gold, it's about sovereignty, self-determination, and the audacious reclaiming of a nation's wealth.
Congo. It's home to mines containing some of the purest gold in the world, but while consumers in richer countries are prepared to pay high prices for a finished product, the men who mine this precious commodity are paying a price of a different kind. Extortion and rights abuses are rife at the DRC gold.
For far too long, the West has treated African nations like Burkina Faso as mere resource banks, with little concern for the devastation wrought on the local population. The gold that has flowed out of Burkina Faso has funded terror and instability, leaving the country impoverished while enriching foreign interests. But now, the tables are turning. And gold export to nations like Switzerland is getting banned. But how did Switzerland come into this? Has it not always been France? Well, today a lot of things will shock you, and this is one of them. The suspension of gold exports is more than just an economic decision. It's a political statement that challenges the very foundations of Western control over Africa. It signals a shift in the balance of power, where African nations are no longer willing to be passive participants in their exploitation. But why has Burkina Faso become the focal point in the struggle over Africa's natural resources? The answer lies in the importance of gold in global economics and the exploitation that has invaded the continent for centuries. Burkina Faso, Africa's 4th largest gold producer, sits on a treasure trove of mineral wealth. However, much of this wealth has been taken off by foreign powers, leaving the country impoverished and destabilized. Gold is not just a precious metal. It is the lifeblood of economies, especially for nations rich in natural resources but struggling with development. In Burkina Faso, gold mining has been a critical part of the economy, contributing significantly to state revenue. However, the benefits of this wealth have not been equally distributed. Instead, they have been captured by a small elite, often in collaboration with foreign corporations and governments, leaving the vast majority of the population in poverty. The military junta in Burkina Faso, under the leadership of Captain Traoré, recognizes this exploitation and has taken decisive action to stop it. By suspending the export of artisanal and semi-mechanized gold, the junta is effectively cutting off a major source of illegal revenue for these shadowy networks. This move is not just about securing the country's wealth, it's about asserting control over its future. But how did Burkina Faso reach this point? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. The roots of this struggle can be traced back to the colonial era when European powers carved up Africa for their benefit. Even after gaining independence, African nations like Burkina Faso have struggled to break free from the economic chains that bind them to their former colonizers. The structures of exploitation established during the colonial period have persisted, often in more subtle but equally destructive forms. Western corporations, often with the backing of their governments, have continued to extract Africa's resources at a fraction of their true value. They have done this through a combination of corrupt practices, legal loopholes, and sheer economic power. The result has been a transfer of wealth from Africa to the West, leaving African nations with little to show for their abundant natural resources. In Burkina Faso, this exploitation has been heightened by the involvement of armed groups who have used the proceeds from illegal gold mining to fund their activities. These groups have thrived in the chaos created by weak governance and external meddling, turning parts of the country into lawless zones where the rule of law is replaced by the rule of the gun. The military junta's decision to suspend gold exports is a direct response to this crisis. It is an attempt to restore order to a sector that has been plagued by corruption, violence, and exploitation. By taking control of the gold trade, the junta is also taking control of the country's future, ensuring that its resources are used for the benefit of the people, rather than being taken off by foreign powers and their local collaborators. But this battle is far from over. The West, with its rooted interests in Africa, is unlikely to back down without a fight. The suspension of gold exports is just the first step in a larger strategy to reclaim Africa's resources and ensure they benefit the people who live on the continent, not those who exploit it from afar. And what drives the West's insatiable appetite for African gold? The answer is both simple and complex: control. For centuries, Western powers have sought to control Africa's vast resources, using a combination of economic pressure, political manipulation, and, when necessary, military force. Gold is not just a precious metal, it is a symbol of power, wealth, and control. By controlling the flow of gold out of Africa, Western nations have maintained their dominance on the global stage. Gold has always held a special place in the global economy, serving as a store of value, a hedge against inflation, and a symbol of wealth and power. For Western nations, access to African gold has been a key factor in maintaining their economic and political dominance. The gold extracted from African mines has flowed into the vaults of Western banks, providing the capital needed to fuel their economies while leaving African nations impoverished. In the case of Burkina Faso, the West's involvement in the gold trade has been anything but benign. Reports of illegal gold exports, often facilitated by corrupt officials and foreign corporations, are rampant. This gold is then laundered through various channels, ending up in the vaults of Western banks and corporations, far from the reach of the people who should rightfully benefit from it. The military junta's decision to suspend gold exports is a direct challenge to this system of exploitation. It is a statement that Burkina Faso will no longer allow its wealth to be siphoned off by foreign interests. But this move is not without its risks. The West, particularly countries with a long history of colonial exploitation in Africa, is likely to respond with economic and political pressure, seeking to undermine the junta's efforts and restore the status quo. To understand why the West is so determined to maintain control over Africa's resources, it is important to look at the broader geopolitical context. The global economy is increasingly competitive, with emerging powers like China and India challenging the dominance of the traditional Western powers. In this context, control over resources like gold is seen as a strategic imperative. For Western nations, maintaining access to African resources is not just about economic gain, it is about keeping their position in the global hierarchy. The exploitation of Africa's resources has been a cornerstone of Western power for centuries, and they are unlikely to give it up without a fight. However, the junta in Burkina Faso is not backing down. They understand that this is not just about gold, it's about reclaiming control over their country's future. By cutting off the flow of gold to the West, Burkina Faso is effectively challenging the entire neo-colonial system that has kept Africa in a state of perpetual underdevelopment. It is a bold move, and one that could have far-reaching implications for the entire continent. The question now is how the West will respond. Will they seek to undermine the junta's efforts through economic sanctions, political pressure, or even covert action? Or will they recognize that the world is changing and that Africa is no longer willing to be a passive participant in its exploitation? The stakes are high, and the outcome of this struggle will have profound implications for the future of Africa and the global order. Here, an important question is, how does the West maintain its control over Africa? One of the most powerful tools in its arsenal is the manipulation of narratives. For decades, Western media and politicians have portrayed Africa as a continent plagued by corruption, violence, and poverty. This narrative serves to justify the continued exploitation of Africa's resources while diverting attention from the role that Western powers play in perpetuating these problems. The portrayal of Africa as a continent in perpetual crisis is not just a reflection of reality. It is a carefully constructed narrative designed to serve the interests of the West. By focusing on the negative aspects of life in Africa, Western media creates a sense of hopelessness and inevitability, suggesting that the continent is incapable of managing its affairs without outside intervention. This narrative is reinforced by politicians like Giorgia Meloni, who in 2019 claimed that 50% of everything Burkina Faso exports ends up in the French treasury. This statement, while attention-grabbing, is completely false. World Bank data reveals that France is not even among the top 5 destinations for Burkina Faso's exports. Nearly 90% of Burkina Faso's gold is exported to Switzerland, not France. This kind of misinformation is not accidental. It is part of a deliberate strategy to deflect blame and maintain the status quo. By focusing attention on false narratives, Western powers can continue to exploit Africa's resources without facing scrutiny or accountability. Meanwhile, the true nature of the exploitation, how African wealth is funneled out of the continent and into the coffers of Western corporations, remains hidden from public view. The manipulation of narratives extends beyond the media and into the realm of international politics. Western governments and international organizations often present themselves as champions of democracy and human rights, while ignoring the role they play in propping up corrupt regimes and exploiting Africa's resources. This hypocrisy is rarely challenged in the mainstream media, which continues to portray Africa as a continent in need of saving by its former colonizers. But Burkina Faso is challenging this narrative. By taking control of its gold exports, the military junta is not only reclaiming its wealth, but also rewriting the story of its country. This is a story of resistance, of a nation refusing to be defined by the narratives imposed upon it by outsiders. It is a story that resonates across Africa, where other nations are beginning to question the narratives that have kept them in chains for so long. The challenge for Burkina Faso and other African nations is to create their narratives, ones that reflect their reality and aspirations. This is not just about telling a different story, it is about reclaiming control over their destinies. By challenging the narratives imposed upon them by the West, African nations can begin to assert their sovereignty and take control of their future. But this will not be easy. The Western media and political establishment have a vested interest in maintaining their control over the narrative. They will continue to portray Africa in a negative light, using their considerable resources to drown out alternative voices. However, as Burkina Faso's actions demonstrate, it is possible to challenge these narratives and create a new story for Africa, one of empowerment, sovereignty, and self-determination. Can Burkina Faso's actions spark a larger movement across Africa? The answer lies in the growing sentiment across the continent against neo-colonial exploitation. Burkina Faso is not alone in its struggle to reclaim control over its resources. Across Africa, there is a rising tide of resistance against the Western powers that have long exploited the continent's wealth while leaving its people in poverty. In the Sahel region, where Burkina Faso is located, other nations are also taking steps to assert their sovereignty. Military leaders in countries like Mali and Niger have similarly expressed their dissatisfaction with the current global order, where African resources are exploited for the benefit of others. These leaders are not just making empty statements. They are taking concrete actions to reclaim control over their country's futures. This shift is not just about gold or other resources. It is about a broader movement towards self-determination and sovereignty. For too long, African nations have been forced to play by the rules set by their former colonizers. But now, they are beginning to write their own rules, to define their futures. This is a powerful and transformative shift, one that could reshape the entire continent in the years to come. The actions of Burkina Faso have resonated across Africa, inspiring other nations to take similar steps to protect their resources and assert their sovereignty. In Mali, for example, the government has taken steps to nationalize its gold mining industry, reducing the influence of foreign corporations and ensuring that more of the wealth generated by the country's resources stays within its borders. In Niger, the government has also taken steps to assert greater control over its uranium resources, which French corporations have long exploited. By renegotiating contracts and asserting greater control over its resources, Niger is following in the footsteps of Burkina Faso, challenging the status quo and asserting its sovereignty. These actions are part of a broader trend across Africa, where nations are increasingly challenging the neo-colonial structures that have kept them in a state of perpetual underdevelopment. From the nationalization of resources to the assertion of greater control over economic policies, African nations are beginning to take control of their destinies. However, this shift is not without its challenges. The question is whether Africa is prepared to withstand this pressure and continue on its path toward sovereignty. The answer to this question will depend on the willingness of African nations to stand together in the face of Western pressure. Burkina Faso's actions have set a powerful precedent, but they will need the support of other African nations to truly bring about lasting change. This is a moment of opportunity for Africa, a chance to break free from the chains of neo-colonialism and forge a new path forward. The challenge for Africa is to build a united front against the forces of neo-colonialism. This will require not only political will, but also economic cooperation and solidarity. African nations must work together to develop their economies, reduce their dependence on foreign aid and investment, and create a new economic order that benefits the people of Africa rather than foreign powers. This is a daunting task, but it is one that Africa is increasingly prepared to undertake. The actions of Burkina Faso and other nations in the Sahel are just the beginning of a larger movement towards sovereignty and self-determination. The question now is whether Africa can sustain this momentum and build a new future for itself, free from the exploitation and control of foreign powers. What does the future hold for Burkina Faso and the broader African continent? The answer is uncertain, but one thing is clear. The status quo is being challenged like never before. Burkina Faso's decision to suspend gold exports is just the beginning of a larger struggle for control over Africa's resources. This struggle will not be easy, and it will likely be met with fierce resistance from the West, which has a vested interest in maintaining its control over the continent. However, the actions of Burkina Faso and other African nations suggest that a new era is dawning in Africa. This is an era where African nations are no longer willing to be passive participants in their exploitation. Instead, they are taking control of their resources, asserting their sovereignty, and demanding a fair share of the wealth generated by their natural resources. The future of Burkina Faso will depend on the ability of its leaders to navigate the challenges that lie ahead. This will require not only political will, but also economic and diplomatic acumen. The junta must find ways to develop the country's economy without relying on the exploitation of its resources by foreign powers. This will require investment in infrastructure, education, and healthcare, as well as the development of a strong and independent private sector. The international community will also play a crucial role in determining the future of Burkina Faso. The West, with its entrenched interests in Africa, is unlikely to give up its control without a fight. Economic sanctions, political pressure, and even military intervention are all tools that Western powers have used in the past to maintain their control over African resources. The question is whether Africa is prepared to withstand this pressure and continue on its path towards sovereignty. The actions of Burkina Faso and other nations in the Sahel are just the beginning of a larger movement towards sovereignty and self-determination. The question now is whether Africa can sustain this momentum and build a new future for itself, free from the exploitation and control of foreign powers. The stakes are high, but the potential rewards are immense. If African nations can successfully reclaim control over their resources and assert their sovereignty, they have the potential to transform the continent and create a new future for their people. This is a moment of opportunity for Africa, a chance to break free from the chains of neo-colonialism and forge a new path forward. The road ahead will be difficult, but the potential rewards are immense. Africa's time has come, and the world must take notice. Do you think this banning export is a good decision? Will this make the economy of Africa better? Let us know in the comment section. Isn't trading with nations like China and Russia better? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.